I think this question is kind of hard because the line references don't jump out as being obviously right. So I'm going to show you what I did the first time I did this question. I had trouble. I hit a roadblock here. And so I just want to really use it as an opportunity to show you that even people who are experts at this test, who have written study guides about the SAT, don't know the answer instantly on every question. And what being good at the SAT is about is really just like having a system in place for when things don't go as expected. So let me show you how I think about this, right? So 27 is a very clear question. What does the author imply about pelicans, storks, and geese flying in a V formation? So there's two ideas that I really want to get out of these lines. Something about pelicans, storks, and geese that's very specific, and something about the V formation. So let's go to the lines, right? So QLC method, right? I'm following the QLC method. I read the question, make sure I underline anything that's important. Then I go to the lines, and I try to see what matches. So lines 35 to 38, let's look. Right here. When a bird flew directly behind another, the timing of the flapping reversed so that it could minimize the effects of the downdraft coming off the back of the bird's body. Okay, so maybe that's about the V formation because they're kind of flying behind each other. So maybe, but it doesn't say anything about pelicans, storks, and geese. So that's probably not right. 47 to 48, right here. B. Smaller birds create more complex wakes that would make drafting too difficult. Okay, well, I guess drafting is the V formation, but smaller birds, I mean, pelicans, storks, and geese are not small, so that seems wrong. 52 to 54. Here we go. Previous studies estimate that birds can use 20% to 30% less energy while flying in a V. Again, it's about the V, so that's pretty good, but it's not talking about the specific birds that I want. So are they talking about birds that like geese and storks and everything? I don't really know. This is too vague. So maybe I keep it in, maybe I eliminate it. Like it doesn't seem to have what I need. And then we go to 66 to 67. Alternatively, they may move around until they find the location with the least resistance. Who are they? What is they? I don't know what they are. They, if we go back, scientists do not know how the birds find the aerodynamic sweet spot, but they suspect that the animals align themselves either by sight or by sensing air currents through their feathers. Again, they're talking too vaguely about birds. So look, here's a case where I go through these line references and I've eliminated every single choice. Truth. That happens sometimes. I do it like maybe once or twice per test where I go through a set of choices and I eliminate everything. And you're like, uh-oh, something's got to be right. Something I did is wrong here. And that's okay. That just means I must have missed something, right? Like they must have been talking about pelicans, storks, and geese in some place, but I just didn't notice it. Now, normally when I do these questions, as you can just see, when I'm given a line reference, I am not following the +1 sentence rule that I use for other questions. And the reason is that rule really only applies when the line reference is in the question itself. When the line reference is in the choices, like for an evidence question, we normally just want to stick to those lines because we don't want to bring in information from outside of where we're told, right? The evidence is supposed to be that line itself. We don't want really to get a bigger picture because that might distract us. Now, I made an exception though, right? For choice D, I read a little beyond or behind where I was told. And the reason I did that is I had a vague pronoun in my line reference. And so in order to understand the evidence, I need to understand what came before it to know what we're talking about. And so that is okay. And maybe my realization now is maybe I should have done that more because maybe they were talking about these other birds and I just didn't notice it. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go back to these line references and look for that phrase, pelicans, storks, and geese. Anything about those birds is going to mean that choice is kind of back in the mix. So let's go. I still think it's not D because they don't, I read that part, but let's go to A, B, and C again. So A talks about birds again, the beats of the birds, different birds. Okay, so again, nothing about the birds that they are asking about, right? More birds. Let's keep going. The finding likely applies to other long-winged birds such as pelicans, storks, and geese. So in the line previous to B, they're talking exactly about the birds that I need them to talk about, pelicans, storks, and geese. Smaller birds create more complex wakes that would not make drafting too difficult. So what's going on here? They're making a contrast. They're saying that big birds, like pelicans, storks, geese, and the ibises that the findings are about, they have different properties than the small birds, and so the findings might not apply to the small birds. So they're saying pelicans, storks, and geese are the same as the ibises, right? So that's something that, I mean, we can kind of look back here. They keep talking about birds just very generally, which I don't love. But we remember from previous questions in this passage that the ibises were chosen, right? So the ibises are the bird that we're studying, and now they're saying that that study on the ibises likely applies to pelicans, storks, and geese. So this is looking really good. So I'm going to erase my little cross out here. This seems like it might be right. Let's look at C and just make sure. The researchers did not attempt to calculate the bird's energy savings because the necessary physiological measurements would be too invasive for an endangered species. Previous studies estimate that birds can use 20% to 30% less energy while flying in a V. Okay, so maybe the pelicans, storks, and geese can also use less energy. Maybe. So let me write some notes here. So the pelicans, storks, and geese would use less energy in the V. And here we're saying that these big birds are similar to the ibis. I hate that those were kind of long, but it gets the point across. That's kind of what these lines are saying. So now we go here to the choices, the last step of the QLC method, and we see, does anything match up with what I'm picking out of these lines now that I've looked at them a second time? A, they communicate with each other in the same way that ibises do. No, we didn't talk about them communicating. They're flying, right? And they're flying together, but there's nothing about the way that they communicate. We don't know, are they, geese honk. I don't really know what sound a pelican makes, but we don't know. Nothing about communication. B, they have the same migration routes as those of ibises. No, it doesn't get that specific. It says that they're similar, but notice now we're getting too specific about what makes them similar. What makes them similar is the V thing, right? The way that they kind of fly together, but they're not on the same part of the planet flying, right? That's not what they're saying. So the same migration route, way too specific, too strong. C, they create a similar wake to that of ibises. Well, similar to ibis. And the wake is basically another way of talking about the V formation. So that sounds pretty good. Let's look at D here. They expend more energy than do ibises. No. Now notice that's a trap choice because energy is exactly what we noticed in line reference C. But the point that they're making is that those big birds are going to save energy in the same way that ibises do, right? Or at least that's the prediction. And so this is saying that the pelicans, storks, and geese are different from the ibises. But what we learned is that they're the same, or at least similar enough. And so D is kind of like a trap because it's using similar words, but it's inverting the meaning. That's a classic SAT trap. They do that a lot. And so your brain, because it likes matching things, notices the match, the energy. And if you're not careful, you're going to just stop there and not examine the rest of the choice, right? The rest of the choice says more energy, or they expend more energy. Let's include that part too. Expend more energy. But the line reference, go back to it, 52 to 50C, is saying that the birds can use less energy. So they're saving energy, and this is saying that they're using more. Complete opposite. And so there you go. They create a similar wake to the ibises because presumably they're all flying in the same formation and kind of have a similar pattern. So that's what we're going with here. This would be a tough question. This video is taking me a long time to get through, and this question on the SAT would actually take me a little bit longer than most others to get through. So I just want you to know that that's okay. Occasionally you're going to hit things that don't really conform to the normal expectations. And that's why we want to have good expectations and good processes and strong habits in place. because that will get us 90% of the way there. And then because you're so good at that 90%, when the weird 10% comes along, you'll be prepared to try new things and to take the time to figure out the weirdness. And so if you don't have a good process for the 90%, then everything's going to feel weird, and you don't want that to happen. So just the fact that there's an exception or a hard question does not invalidate those strategies. It reinforces them. The SAT likes to throw curveballs, but we got to be used to the normal stuff first before we can deal with the weird stuff. And the better you are at the normal, the more easily you'll recognize when something's weird and be able to adjust for it. That's what it means to get a 700 plus in the SAT, is you're good at the normal stuff and you're capable of noticing the weird stuff and rising to the occasion.